Okay, so let's talk about Spain. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is tell you that I'm going to think about this like it's both in the key of D major and like it's in the key of B minor. So that way you can more easily relate what I'm going to tell you into other songs when you see this type of pattern that happens. So before I even start going into anything about Spain, I'm going to go over Autumn Leaves, because this is one of your first beginner kind of jazz songs that you learn. So let me just play the chord changes to Autumn Leaves in G minor, because most people play it in G minor. So it starts on the 4, which is a minor 7. And you have what I like to call a Bach progression, which is this kind of thing. Right? This sets you back up to go to the C minor again. So you wind up on that G minor to a G7, going back to a C7. All right, so Spain does almost exactly the same thing, but we're in the key of B minor instead of G minor. So let me play the part where it does that for Spain, which is when it goes to the E minor 7. Now, just to give you a heads up, I'm using the chord changes from the New Real book, which are like this. I'll go over it a little bit in a minute. But let's start on the E minor 7. I'm just going to play the thirds and the sevenths and the root. Here we go. Instead of going to a half diminished chord, we go to a dominant 7 chord. This is your C sharp, dominant 7. This chord right here is the one that separates the boys from the men. Whenever you hear this chord, you hear what somebody does over it, and it tells you whether or not they know what they're doing. So you got this chord to another dominant 7 chord, and then you go to your B minor, then to a B7. All right, so I'm gonna only play the thirds and the sevenths for this, and let me take the time right now to make sure that we're all on the same page as far as what the chords are. So the first chord is a G major 7. Now, Chick Corea plays his solo modally on this song a lot. And when he gets the audience involved, then he switches to a much more diatonic. So diatonic meaning if I'm thinking about it in the key of D major, I'm relating all the chords as close as I can to D major. So G major 7, but relating it to D major has a C sharp. Basically, it's your D major scale, but you start on the 4. All right, so your first chord with G major 7. Then we go to an F sharp 7. That F sharp 7 right there, that's another one of those chords that really lets you know if somebody knows what they're doing or not. I just did a whole video called a reversed diminished scale on basically that whole concept. All right, so let's keep going. Then we have an E minor 7. This is when we get to that Autumn Leaves part, or the Bach progression. To an A7, to a D major 7, back to the G7. Then we have a C sharp 7 to an F sharp 7. Got that same F sharp 7 thing again. Then to our B minor. Then to a B7. Okay, so let's go over each chord and I'll tell you what you should be thinking. Alright, so the first chord, we got a G major 7. I'm mainly sticking to playing the thirds and the sevenths with the root. Alright, so that's your G Lydian major 7. So you got a G major 7 with a C sharp instead of a C natural, because we're diatonic to the key of D. Now we get to this one, the F sharp 7. So I talked about in my reverse diminished scale starting a major bebop scale, but on the added note. So if we have our key of D, we start the scale on the added note, which is the B flat. All right, so let's try that. Easy. All right, and then we have that Bach progression thing. You can mainly think for those 4 chords just playing in the key of D major. So I'm going to show you something that works really well over that part of the song that you probably didn't think about before, and it works in relationship to that major bebop scale. So we got D, E, F sharp, G, A sharp, B, C sharp, D. All right, but we're going to start on the C sharp. Because this is a major 7 thing, we want to emphasize the major 7. I want to show you something that's related to the major bebop sound, the major bebop idea, which is adding this extra note so that way we can balance the chord. The unaccented note spells out the chord, which is actually a C6. The accented note spells a diminished chord. All right, this is closely related to Barry Harris's thing, so you wind up with. But I'm going to make a change to what I'm going to show you now over that Bach style progression. Instead of having your D major scale, your D major bebop scale, I'm going to start it on the C sharp. And instead of having the B flat or the A sharp as the added note, I'm going to take that one out and I'm going to add the F natural. So we wind up with a scale that sounds like this. So let's look at the unaccented note, which should outline the chord. Right? So in the key of D, we get the major 7, 9, 3rd, 5. If I do that trick on the regular way we play the bebop scale, I wind up with the unaccented note as a major 6. And with all this major 7 being such a powerful overriding sound, it starts to get a little So I'm going to start on the C sharp, and I'm going to use an F sharp or an F natural as the added note. All right, sorry about my bad piano playing. But when we do that, we go from this to this. So we have the regular major bebop scale, which is defining this sound. And the one that I just showed you, when we take out the A sharp, substitute that for an F natural, starting on the major 7, we wind up with something like this. This is much more closely related to the major 7 idea. I'm going to go back, lay down the chords, and then play all of this with my sax, and then you'll be able to hear it a lot better. But this is a nice way of thinking about it. Plus, it's a very easy thing to start to visualize when you sit down at a piano and go through this. And then once we get to this chord, which will normally be a half diminished chord, this is a dominant 7. Here's what you can play on that. So in jazz, we have what's called a melodic minor. In jazz, we only care about the ascending form of the melodic minor scale. That allows us to be able to build other chords that relate to the sounds that we hear in jazz. Now, it's limited, but knowing and understanding melodic minor, that's what separates the guys who play well versus the guys who play great. They understand how to use this idea. So the idea is that you build your modes off of the melodic minor scale ascending. So let's say in the key of C, so you can get a sound like this. You hear this all the time. And in like detective movies, when something mysterious happens, you always hear something like this.
And then the dame walked in. He decided to play his ace of spade card.
We want to use that sound over this C sharp 7. So remember, we're playing everything as close to the key of D major as possible. So how does a C sharp 7 relate to a D major 7? Well, if we go back to what I just talked about with that melodic minor, but we start on D. So your melodic minor ascending, all you do is lower the third. Then you have a major 6 and a major 7. You wind up with this. So how does this scale relate to a C sharp 7? Well, if you look, you can see all we do is start on a different note. It's the same sound. That's what we want to use when we get to that part. And then we go to our F sharp 7 after that. We'll use that same reversed diminished scale thing that we talked about, which resolves to B minor. And then it goes to a B7 after that. All right, so let's go back to that C sharp 7. So if you start that on the D, it's gonna sound very bizarre. So I would start that on the C sharp. Once we get to that F sharp 7, I can go back to the reversed diminished scale. Okay, so the last two chords, we have this B minor, which is our point of resolution. At this point, I would go back to the original bebop scale. So we wind up with this. So that's your D major bebop scale. All you do is start on your B natural. And then it goes to a B7. To my ear, that B7 is the highest point of harmonic tension. And this is where you can use the most amount of alterations to the chord, which is generally a fully altered dominant 7 chord. So you wind up with something like this. Going back to the G major 7. All right, so let's take a look at this B7, the fully altered. There's your B7, there's a sharp 9, there's a flat 9. You can even have the sharp 5 in there. I'm gonna do this in C because this C melodic minor is gonna relate to the chord that it fits over, which is the very last chord at the end of the chord progression, which is your B7. So we go from that B minor to a B7. The B7 at the end of that is one of the high points of the harmonic tension. So we need a chord that's fully altered, and this is where we derive our fully altered dominant 7 scale. So in the key of C, you can think of C major, but we have C minor, but only we lower the 3rd, not the 7th. So this scale is just like C major, but we have an E flat. You only have the one lowered tone. So if you're in G, all you have is B flat, then you keep your E natural and your F sharp. But I'm doing this in the key of C, because if I start that on a B natural, then it goes back to our G7. All right, so we can go from this B minor 7 okay, let's move on. All right, I want to take this time to just walk you through every chord since I have my horn here, and then you'll get an idea of what it sounds like when I'm playing over it, and then after that, then I'll play it with the chords as though it's a real gig. Okay, so we have our G major 7, sharp 11. F sharp 7. And then the Bach progression. Back to your D major 7. Back to your G major 7. Remember that detective thing? Okay, and then we go back to our F sharp 7. Remember, that's the regular D major bebop scale, but we start on the added note. All right, and then we go to our B minor 7. Then to the B7. Okay, so I'm gonna show you guys something a little different for this one, the B7 here. Because before I talked about using that C melodic minor, starting on B, so that would be your B diminished whole tone scale, but I'm gonna show you guys something a little different. Over this B7, you can play an E minor major 7, or your E melodic minor. Alright, so with the B7, I need the B, I need the A, which is the 7th, and I need the 3rd. So you can already start to hear what's going on with that. And then that goes back to your G major 7. Alright, so let me play with that B7 for you. Remember that detective thing? Alright, so let me play this as though this is for real. 2. something like that. All right, so let me throw some chords up under this thing, and then you'll get to hear that. All right, here we go.